Good morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock. We are going to wait about one full minute to make sure that people can find that calendar invite, click it, and get in. We had a really nice high number of registrants, and I can see that they haven't found us all yet. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get started at 1 minute after the hour with our plenary session. Thank you all for joining us. All right, we have a lot planned for our half-day summit today, so we are going to get started. Thank you for attending this session, and I hope that many of you are able to find time in your schedules to attend our afternoon sessions. We're very thankful to have Hailey Babb here from SPARC. So Hailey Babb is going to give our plenary, our first session today. Hailey is the Open Education Program Manager at SPARC and is currently based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. In her role, she supports the SPARC Open Education Program's policy and advocacy development and community organizing. So we're very thankful to have her here for that purpose. Hailey was an active student leader at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada, where she co-organized the province of Alberta's inaugural Textbook Broke AB campaign. At SPARC, Hailey plays a key role in the open education team's major projects. So I am very excited to hand it over to Hailey for our first session of the morning. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and a big thank you to the team here for having me today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present. Let me just take a moment to get my slides in front of you. All righty. Okay, so today's session, I believe we have just a little over an hour together, so I'm gonna hop right in. I'm thrilled to be able to be here today to talk to you a little bit about building advocacy capacity for OER and what that looks like in a practical sense. So quick, just a couple quick introductions. So SPARC, in case any of you aren't familiar, we are the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. That took me about a year to pin down, so no worries if you don't get it right away. But basically what we are is we're a membership organization of university and college libraries across the US and Canada, all coming together to advocate for open education, research, and data. So I work on the open education side of things a little bit more specifically. And then I guess just really quickly a bit about myself. I know Lauren gave a wonderful introduction, but I have helped develop a program at SPARC called the Foundations and Advocacy Skills Program. And that's been kind of a pilot program that we've been running over the past couple of years. It has been exclusive to SPARC members up until this point. So we're still kind of deciding, how exactly to implement this program. And what this presentation is today is sort of the 1 hour condensed version of all of that. So we will be throwing a lot of information at you. Um, and I guess just any feedback on what's useful is welcome as well as we sort of pin down exactly what the best way of delivering this session is. So this is typically a 4-week program that we offer. Again, I'm going to try and condense it down into an hour for you. So apologies if it's a lot of information first thing in the morning, but I hope that it'll be useful. So, on our agenda today, I'm going to start off with just a little bit of a background. What is advocacy? How do we define it? And then dive into what we at SPARC call our advocacy framework. So this is how we think about advocacy here at SPARC. You'll hear me say a bunch of times throughout this presentation, there's no one way to do advocacy. So, more on that later. But that will include things like identifying a problem and a solution to that problem, what advocacy goals we'd like to set in order to address that problem, who the sort of effective parties are in the ecosystem. And then we'll dive into sort of the nitty-gritty strategies and tactics for achieving your advocacy goal. And then we'll wrap up with some tips for actually going ahead and making that ask to someone, as well as some sort of final general advocacy tips. So, starting at the very beginning, what exactly is advocacy? What is it that we're going to be talking about today? How we like to define advocacy is taking action in order to influence change. So, two key pieces here. Advocacy specifically is influencing a change in your environment that you yourself otherwise wouldn't have the power to change. So, it obviously includes a level of influencing somebody who may have a greater power or access than you in order to effectively implement a change. So, where can advocacy happen? This can happen in a lot of different places. I think oftentimes when we think of advocacy, we think about, policies and politicians and government and that sort of thing. But that's not the only place that we can do advocacy. So, you can see I've got government on here, but this also happens at our institutions within departments. Advocacy can also happen between our families and friends, to our employer, at the doctor's office. You can be advocating on behalf of yourself. The point of this is just to show you that this is not necessarily limited to that sort of governmental setting. And actually, I did want to make a note as well that there is a distinction between advocacy and lobbying. So, lobbying is sort of what we classify as that more specific, very rigid, very protocol driven practice that we do when we're working with elected officials. And that's not what we're going to be talking about today. That would be a whole other presentation. So, I wanted to start out just by prompting a little bit of thinking and inviting you to share in the chat if you're comfortable, a little bit about your advocacy why. And there's a reason that we do this and try to stay grounded as advocates in our why. And that's because things can get very complicated along the way. And it's very important to be able to have that anchor that we can come back and draw ourselves to. So, for example, for me, when I was going through my higher education journey, I took a very non-traditional route. I did student government, which in Canada is sort of like a full-time position. You're only allowed to take one or two classes. So I took quite a long time going through my degree, and I was very grateful to have sort of the flexibility that openness afforded me. And I was also the first person in my immediate family to go to university. So. Those are some of the reasons why I feel grounded in this work and feel it's important to extend that flexibility and that access to others and make sure that they could have access to the same experience that I had. So if you feel comfortable, it doesn't have to be super long-winded, but invite you to pop a few of your thoughts into the chat. All right. So before we get into the meat of the session, I just want to start off with a few disclaimers. So first and foremost, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's no one way to do advocacy. I think oftentimes when we're in an academic setting, we're used to sort of rigid um, ways of doing things, and advocacy is very much not that. So again, this framework that I'm going to walk you through today is how we think of it at SPARC, but it's certainly not the only way that this happens, and there's lots of different ways to think about this. There's a lot of gray that goes into advocacy. The second is that context is key. So, a lot of the things that I will talk about from my personal experience might not be what you've experienced, and you may have a different, um, you know, background or experience with some of these things, and that is absolutely fine. There is so much it depends that happens in advocacy work, and as you'll see when we get into things, often we're very often sort of reevaluating the environment that we're in based on changes and redirecting our roadmap to go into different places. So, the goal of what I want to accomplish with you today is to get you to think like an advocate, get this sort of mindset brewing for you a little bit rather than following the framework perfectly and exactly. So, just keep that in mind as we go along. Alrighty. So, I am going to share a little interactive resource with all of you that you can follow along with if you would like to. I'm going to pop a link to it in the chat, but you should also be able to follow this URL down at the bottom. When you get into this document, you're going to notice that it's going to prompt you to request edit access. Instead of doing that, there's some instructions at the very top of the file that will just sort of get you to make your own copy of the sheet. So if you go up to File, Copy, Save to your own drive, you'll be able to sort of have your own personal document that you can work from. So what this is our advocacy roadmap. So this is going to prompt you to think about an issue that's going on your campus or your community, your institution. Um, and as we go through the roadmap, you can kind of jot down a few ideas about what's relevant to you. And this can be something that you come back to time after time to update, work through, but it's meant to help you sort of think through this whole process and arrive at the very end of the roadmap with your sort of fully formed advocacy ask. Um, so hopefully that is accessible to you. I will link it sort of throughout the presentation in the chat if people are joining late. Um, and just pop me a message in the chat if there's any issues there. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this is the advocacy framework that we use here at SPARC. So it's sort of a five-step tiered model. We start at the very top with an extremely high level problem that we're trying to solve. This is like a sky high big picture thing. You can think of this as like if you've ever done nonprofit, like strategic mission goals work, like this is your very high level issue that you're trying to solve. We then have a proposed solution that is going to be, of course, the solution to this problem. It's not going to be something that's easily implemented. Again, this is also going to stay very high level. And then we get into your advocacy goals, which are sort of the incremental steps that you're taking towards these high level issues. And this is where, you're going to be able to reset your goal depending on what's going on in your environment, what's available to you, that sort of thing. And then lastly, we have our strategies and our tactics. This is sort of our what we think of when we think of advocacy, like what are the nitty-gritty things that we're doing in order to meet our goals. So I'm going to start off by talking about our problem and solution a little bit. So when we're thinking about our problem, our advocacy problem and our advocacy solution, we want to be thinking about what are the things, or what's the problem with the status quo that keeps the world from being how it should be? And what are the broader changes that could be made that would be able to solve this problem? And then most importantly, why is this important right now? Why is this something that we should be considering in this moment? So here's an example. A problem could be something like this. The cost of educational materials is rising year after year, contributing to the larger affordability issue in higher education, which in turn leads to lower enrollment. So I'm going to be taking, for example, just for the purposes of an example throughout this whole presentation, this affordability issue, but definitely acknowledging that there's a lot more that goes into OER, and a lot more reasons why we could be advocating for OER other than simply affordability. But for ease of understanding, we're going to stick with this one. A solution potentially could be institutions expanding the effective use of OER in order to help alleviate the financial burden on students and increase their retention. So this is just one angle you could take. Some tips for framing your problem. So you want to state what's wrong with the status quo in terms that most people would be able to see and agree with. Of course, you're never going to have 100% agreement on anything you say, especially in these times. But what you want to do is try to make your statement as neutral and agreeable as possible so that most people could say, yes, okay, I do acknowledge that, that is a broader problem. We may not agree on the nuances of it, but the fact that education is very expensive could be something that's broadly agreeable. And then you want to make sure to draw connections to broader problems and priorities on your campus. So, for example, those in a strategic plan. So, if I go back to the example, we talked about like enrollment and retention. So, that could be something that's been laid out in your institution's strategic plan, that you can sort of tie back to and say, okay, here's here's why this is important to us and here's why this is relevant to us specifically. For your solution, so we want to be stating our vision for how the world or, your campus, your world that you live in, should be, and broadly what changes might get us there. So this should offer a full answer to the problem, but stay at a high level. A few things to consider. So when we're talking about OER specifically, of course, affordability, the example I'm using is a big one, but there's many more things that we can be considering. So, for example, the impact of course materials on equity, student learning outcomes, student access to the internet and different technologies, accessibility more broadly, and then also issues of student choice and agency in uh, their course materials. Okay, so that brings us to our first part of the roadmap. So I'm going to just pause for about a minute to have you really quickly just jot down a few thoughts. They don't have to be full phrases, but think about, describe a problem that your campus or institution is facing, and then maybe a few notes about a potential solution that you would propose to address that problem. So I've linked the document again in the chat for anyone who's just joining. Feel free to make a copy of that document. There's instructions up above, and I'll give us just a few seconds to jot down a few thoughts. Okay, I know that's not a ton of time. I'm sorry. I am going to keep us moving just for the sake of time, but as we go along, feel free to keep popping stuff in there. Alrighty. So going to move next into the goal setting section of our work. And I know many of you have done goal setting work before. A lot of this is going to be sort of largely the same, but I'll talk a little bit about why some of these things are particularly important in an advocacy setting. So, a goal is the specific change that you want to make that's going to be advancing the solution to your problem. And something that specifically we like to emphasize when it comes to advocacy is that this shouldn't be something that you have the power to change yourself. So, for example, something like uh, what can I do? What can I say here? Like putting out a survey if you're somebody who regularly does surveys. Like if this is something that you need permission to conduct and that, the advocacy to make that happen, that's what we would consider. And th those things that you do have the power to do yourself, those are very important and those are things that you should do, but it's not what we would consider advocacy for the purpose of this presentation. So think about something that you would have to influence someone else to approve or get on board with, that sort of thing. Um, and then goals, I know we've all done SMART goals before. So just a refresher, but with advocacy goals in particular, super important to make sure that we're framing these in a way that's it's understandable. So we want your goals to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And actually, with A, achievable, I would sort of caveat and say that we also want to say a little bit ambitious is what I would encourage you to think about as a second A. So we want your goal to be achievable in the sense that it's something that's within the realm of possibility. But we want you to reach a little bit high, and sort of balance those two things. So while your problem and solution will often remain relatively unchanged, your goals are where um, you're going to reroute based on changes in your environment, and they should be adaptable to changes there. So your problem and solution are going to stay relatively the same throughout your whole advocacy journey as long as that is the problem that you are hoping to address. But you may want to take different routes or adjust your goal if you get, a hard no, if some major change in your landscape happens, that sort of thing. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So, when you're thinking about your advocacy goal, here's a few things that you want to keep in mind. You want to be thinking about who or what is at my disposal in order to advance my advocacy goal. So, are there specific resources that are available to me already? And who is already on my team? Who do I not need to, sort of influence on this issue? Is there a student group who's already very vocal about this? Is there a group of faculty? Oftentimes, library is going to be one of your best resources. Um, so who's already on my team and who can I recruit and how can I use their specific place within the campus ecosystem to advance this goal that I'm working on? And then when it's time to formulate your goal, there's also a few different things to think about. So again, we're thinking about what's the solution to my problem. And then knowing what's at my disposal, how can I move towards that solution in a smart way using the SMART framework? And then something we like to recommend as a way to think about this is using this formula, get X to do Y. So X is going to be the person or group of people that you're trying to influence, and Y is going to be the action that you're trying to get them to take. So your X variable is going to be sort of your target. Like, who are you trying to influence in order to get this to happen? So this could be somebody like, if you're doing formal lobbying, like Congress or the state legislature. In the campus environment, it could be admin. It could be a textbook affordability committee. It could be like your department, the chemistry department, whoever is relevant to you. Um, Usually, again, this is where I get into the gray area of advocacy. There's lots of caveats to this. Usually, not goal targets are things like a specific person, or a specific administrator, unless, you're doing something very specific, like asking for a grant and there's one person who needs to green light. But oftentimes, as we all know, working in higher education, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's obviously often a few levels we need to go through. Um, so it's typically not usually one person, but again, take that with a grain of salt. There's lots of exceptions to that. So your goal proposal is going to be your why variable. So these are going to be the things that you're trying to get them to do. So examples, establishing an OER working group. If there's like a automatic textbook billing program potentially coming to your campus, like slowing or stopping the implementation of that in order to think about how we can incorporate OER. Course marking systems, OER and tenure promotion policy, funding for an OER grant program are just a few ideas. And then usually not goal proposals are things like create more OER, increase the use of OER, these sort of like vague things that you want to do. And the reason we don't consider them goal proposals is because they're not necessarily specific enough for what we're trying to achieve with our goal. So these are great things to aspire to, but we want to be a little bit more specific. So like a good one is raising awareness. Very important, awesome thing to do. But what does that mean tangibly? What are the actual concrete steps that we're taking in order to raise awareness? And how do we measure whether or not awareness was raised? All right, so here's an example goal, going off of our affordability example. So by 2027, we want to get university admin to approve an institutional grant program of at least $5,000 to help faculty develop or adopt OER. So a few things are going on here. We're specific about who we're targeting. Is we've got the get X to do Y formula. We're time bound. We are specific, measurable with the $5,000. It's something that's achievable. It's within the realm of possibility, but it's also ambitious depending on your campus situation. Um, and then it's relevant to our goal of increasing the effective use of OER. So maybe I'll pause really quickly just to see if there's any questions um, before we hop into the next section. All right. If anything comes up at any time, feel free to pop something in the chat and I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. Okay, so I'm going to take a little deviation from goals and talk about what we call affected parties. And this is deviating from the framework a little, but not really, because it's very important context for when you're going through the next few steps of the framework. So, why should we analyze affected parties, people who are affected by these policies? So, in order to advocate for change, it's important that you know how these changes will affect people within the system and whose minds you need to be changing. So even if you believe that a change is the right thing to do, there are likely always going to be people who oppose it for their own specific reasons. And understanding where they're coming from and why they feel that way is an important um, tool in our toolkit to be able to do this sort of goal rerouting and make sure that we are as effective as possible in our advocacy. So here's some examples of who we would consider typically affected parties in this ecosystem. So of course, students, faculty, librarians. We've got, parents and families of students, teaching and learning departments, instructional design, IT, employers, administrators, policymakers, authors, bookstore, publishers, and IAs like inclusive access, automatic textbook billing, software vendors. So these are all people who sort of coexist in the environment and have different interests and different roles that they play here. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just to get you thinking. And then we can break down that list of folks into different categories. So first of all, we've got beneficiaries. So these are going to be the people who benefit from your advocacy goal when it is implemented. And then, of course, we'll have allies and opposition. So you're going to have people supporting your goal actively. And then you're going to have people who may oppose your goal actively. So we're going to take a few minutes to identify who those people might be. And then you're also going to have decision makers and influencers. And these are very important to identify. So your decision makers are going to be the people with the power to make decisions that will, act in favor of your goal. And your influencers are going to influence the decision makers. So it might be somebody who has quite a lot of sway with an admin or a department chair, that sort of thing. So thinking about who might be our allies and opposition in the space. Again, another gray area, another a lot of caveats, another it depends. This might look very different depending on your campus context, but I think generally this is who we can consider, students, librarians, parents, teaching, learning, instructional design as allies. Faculty as well, absolutely can be great allies. Sometimes they might not want to be. It really depends. Um, uh, very, very broadly, this is who we're looking at. Opposition may be like a publisher. It could be an admin if they're very focused on something else, or, don't quite see the value in OER just yet. So a few different ways that this can go. And then looking into decision makers and influencers. Um, our influencers, I would say oftentimes are students. I think, I'm somebody who's a very, very vocal student advocate. I think students have a lot of power more than they realize often and ability to say things that, faculty librarians can't always, and are very much can be an untapped resource. So they could definitely be influencers. Faculty for sure are, people who may have sway depending on their sort of position within the university. Parents, absolutely. Policymakers, potentially your campus bookstore, publishers, inclusive access vendors, that sort of thing. And then decision makers, oftentimes that is admin. It can be high level faculty. It can be higher ups within the library. Again, very much dependent on your campus situation and context. So, the reason we want to look at these people more in depth is mostly for this reason. We want to understand their motivations and why they're in the positions that they're in. So we want to think about what goals these people are trying to achieve in their work and what does success in their role look like to them. So, everybody is out here trying to advance in their career, advance in their studies, achieve different goals based on, where they're at in their academic journey. So something that you can consider is where might there be overlap in our goals? And so they may see something a different way than we do, but is there an area where, we both feel strongly about the same thing? That's sort of the common ground where you want to really drill into and move your advocacy forward. So thinking about how you might work together towards a shared vision. And then we'll just do like a couple quick examples of, thinking about what matters to these different folks. So, for example, students. Students care about a lot of things. This is just four that, are going to prompt our thinking. First is the cost of their course materials, the accessibility of them, how easy it is to access and use, whether the materials are relevant and responsive to their, place in the world, their identity, their relevance to what they're trying to learn. And then convenience of use is obviously something that's very important to them. Faculty, again, this could be a lot of things, but some quick examples could be the quality of materials that they're using to teach in their course, the ease of adopting and implementing them, whether or not they're quality support materials, test banks, homework banks, that sort of thing. And then I would argue, I think a lot of faculty, very much care about affordability for students, and want that to be a consideration. All right. We're going to go into our second part of the roadmap. This is the longest one. They'll be shorter after this one. But just really quickly, based on what we just went through, write out a few notes about what an advocacy goal might be on your campus. Again, try to use that get X to do Y formula. Really quickly go through the SMART goal principles: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And then now that you've sort of articulated that goal, identify who a decision maker might be on your campus, who will have the power to sort of make progress towards your goal, and write out what you think their motivations might be, in that space as well. So we'll take just about a minute, maybe under a minute. I know it's not a ton of time to get some stuff down, but even just a few notes are super helpful. And let me know if I need to relink that document again. Oop. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you so much for the reminder. Um, so yeah, very happy to all of this I'm happy to make available to you. I know that we're going through a lot first thing in the morning. I hope you all had your coffee before you logged on today. Um, but I'll share all of these slides, the roadmap, everything, so that you can sort of go through at your own pace, and think about these things a little bit more deeply. All right. Does anybody feel brave enough to share a little bit about where they're at in their roadmap? Talk a little bit about a problem and solution, and um, a potential goal, and who you might talk to about it. You can unmute, or you can pop something in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Joseph, go ahead. I see your raised hand. Thank you.
I just wanted to share that I work for Babb Community College in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we've been working on open education resources for roughly 10 years. And we received a grant back in 2015 from achieving the dream. And we've saved our students about over $3 million since then for a very small community college in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's a milestone that we're very proud of. However, one of the problems that I've run into is that we've sort of, run out of steam a little bit. We still have a lot of people still using OERs. They continue to use OERs. We've even had a couple of people adopt new OERs, but without the grant money, to do things like press releases and, promotional videos and parties and t-shirts and trophies for the faculty and, all these cool things that we did, it just kind of just is, doing one of these things. So I just recently applied to, we got a Go Big grant and I applied to like maybe infuse our OER program with a little bit of cash so that we could bring trainers to our campus, renew the conversation around open educational resources, renew the training. Because I'll be honest with you, I've been in higher education now for 25 years and I've been in online learning for 25 years and I can tell you that OERs are by far has have I think have made the biggest impact for our students because it's something that every student is concerned about cost, and every student is struggling with food insecurity and getting to campus. And I'll tell you, as a executive director of online learning, access codes are the bane of my existence. And just the absolute ridiculousness that students have to put up with in order to get access to their materials. It's just so frustrating. And OERs really help solve that problem. And so there's some of the, I'm really proud of our institution and everybody who has adopted open educational resources, doing a great job caring for our students. But after this big, huge, grant and all this work that we've done, we really kind of are just kind of coasting. And I really hope to get some grant money to reinvigorate our whole program. So I'd really like to see a budget line, for OERs specifically at our institution. So those are things I'm working on.
Totally. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I wanted to say congratulations on the original grant. I think it's very important to celebrate wins when you get them and all that you've been able to achieve through that. So, just because that's starting to dry up and fizzle out, like don't, still consider that a win. I think it's a great example of, potentially going back to the drawing board. Like if I think we all know, money, cash, resources, obviously that's a lot of where advocacy ends up is, having the budget line to be able to do those things. And, something you may be able to consider is, how can we, go back to the drawing board on that, but with new information about, why is this important in this climate right now? So I think we're all facing a difficult situation where there's a lot going on in higher ed at the moment. There's a lot of competing priorities. There's a lot of things to consider. I think for students specifically, like this might not be even on their radar or the highest thing on their radar. So what are the ways in which we can find ways to promote open education that aligns with some of these greater priorities? Like, how can open be a tool to solve some of these greater things that are going on, and push really hard to make that known in this context? And I know that that's a very, very difficult thing to do, but yeah, an important thing to think about. So
Yeah, and
hopefully.
one of the things that we do well up in the Upper Peninsula is winter. And so what we're doing for like the Lunar New Year on February 17th, we're having a winter celebration where we're
Mhm.
celebrating our wins. And one of them is the fact that we've gone past $3 million saving our students money. So we're throwing a big like party. We're gonna have like, an Asian themed like food bar, and it's going to be open to everybody to come and just learn more about all of our wins, like being 100% in Ultra now, and also like, our OERs. So I absolutely agree with you. I think these times, especially, there's so much going on.
Mhm.
You really need to take the time to be positive and celebrate people and celebrate all that they've done and see them. and really see them and all the work that they put in to, education and all of the love and compassion they've shared with their students. It's really important these days to keep it positive. And OERs, it's, a very positive thing to accomplish, I think, for our students. So thank you for mentioning that. We really do need to relax a little bit. And as Americans, we do a great job of, having strokes and heart attacks for working too much. So we just need to, chill a little bit and celebrate our wins more.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you for emphasizing that. Yeah, that's definitely something I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. But yes, a lot of self-preservation definitely does go into advocacy. That's for sure. All right, I'm going to move us along just for the sake of time. I just want to make sure that we get into the fun stuff now. So talking a little bit about our strategies and our tactics in order to achieve our advocacy goals. So what are these things exactly? This can get kind of a gray area, and I sometimes have it can be difficult to distinguish between the two, but I'll do my best. Um, your strategies are going to be your theories for how you're going to bring about the change that you seek to achieve, and your tactics are the specific actions that you'll take. So a strategy is like, what am I going to do in theory to accomplish my goal? And my tactic is like the specific actions I'm going to take in order to meet that. So I'll give an example in just a minute, but first and foremost, I guess just when you're developing your advocacy strategy, thinking about the change that you identified in your goal, how does that get made? What's the process? Who are the decision makers? We're doing our landscape analysis, we're inventorying our environment. We're thinking about who or what could influence them in order to want to make the change. And then a key question when it comes to advocacy, I hope this is one of your big takeaways, is just thinking about what's in it for them. Why does this person want to help me? Why should they be at all interested in what we're doing here? And we'll get back to that in just a minute. So when it comes to your tactics, we'll be thinking about who among our allies' resources are most likely to be that influence to the decision maker, and what are the actions that we can take in order to put our allies and resources to best use. And then also, how can we potentially recruit additional influencers to this cause? So here's some examples. So with our grant, the through line example that we're using here, a strategy could be, in order to get this grant implemented, our sort of theory, more higher level strategy is to convince administration of the return on investment in adopting more OER. So try to convince them that this is a good investment to make. The student savings will, be something that we can promote and talk about as a return on that investment. So then our tactic is going to be actually gathering that savings data from faculty in order to demonstrate that return on investment. So strategy, the good way to tell them apart is, strategy, you're not, it's a little bit more higher level. I was going to say you're not actually like doing something like doing a tactic, but you are convincing them. But your tactic is just sort of breaking down exactly the step that you're taking in order to get there. So a few things to consider in that, which will hopefully make it a little clearer. We've talked about doing the environment inventory. I guess just something to keep in mind when you're doing this, working with other people and influencing is something we like to call the strategy scale when you're implementing your strategy. So there's such a thing as too much pressure, and there's such a thing as too little pressure. We want to live in the middle where we're doing these actions of persuading, incentivizing, and pressuring. A little bit of pressure is a good thing. But what we don't want to do is veer too far to either end of the scale where we're, at worst case, sort of like admonishing somebody for not doing something. Because in an environment where you do sort of have to continually work with the same person, that relationship is going to be important in order to get something done. Of course, in different environments, this can look different. But in the campus community where things are a little bit smaller, if you really need something from that one specific person, avoiding something like this is probably the best way to maintain a long-term relationship and get what you want in the long game. The opposite of that is simply creating a climate where somebody might be likely to do something. So, an example I like to use, and it often sounds like I'm putting this tactic down. I'm not, it's important. But we see a lot of times people will put out surveys or reports. And they'll say, here's a report of the student affordability crisis here at our campus, and here's a report of XYZ. And that is absolutely critical groundwork that you need to lay and very important work. But simply doing the study is not enough. You need to have a specific action that you're requesting of somebody and using that information to sort of back up that ask. So, how can we not simply create a climate? How can we take the next step and make that action to, persuade, incentivize, or pressure somebody to do something? And then back to this question of what's in it for them. Um, we need to always be thinking about our framing and how we can frame what they want to be something that, or what we want to be something that they want as well. Okay, so we're going to really quickly go back to the roadmap. And just take a little under a minute and just jot out a quick few thoughts on what a potential strategy might be, and then maybe one or two tactics that we might use to implement it. And I will go ahead and link one more time for good measure. Okay, I'm going to move us along, but feel free to keep jotting down as we go. Okay, so let's do a really quick summary of the framework. And I'm going to show you a little trick to sort of test whether this has all come together, and it will hopefully make the distinction between strategies and tactics a little clearer for you. So, as a reminder, here's our high-level framework, problem and solution at the top, goal in the very middle, strategies and tactics towards the end. So, here's a really quick summary of the example through line that we've used throughout the presentation. So, our problem, textbooks are expensive, school's expensive, XYZ. Our proposed solution is to potentially expand the effective use of OER to benefit students. Our goal that we're trying to achieve is establishing an institutional OER grant program. And then our strategy is to convince our admin of the return on investment. Our tactic is to gather savings data from faculty in order to do that. And so here's the little trick that you can use is the in order to test that we like to do. So you're going to start at the very bottom of this and say, can I go up to the very top and use in order to achieve each of the next levels? So starting at the very bottom, what we were trying to do is gather savings data from faculty in order to convince university admin of the return on investment, in order to establish an institutional OER grant program, in order to expand the effective use of OER, in order to solve this problem of affordability overall. So just a quick little test you can use as you go through. Okay. So that's the advocacy framework. I'm now going to use the last few minutes to chat about actually making your ask, what that looks like, and some things that you might want to consider when doing so. And then we'll wrap up with a few advocacy tips, and I'll do my best to leave some time for questions and discussion at the end. Here's a little bit about why asking is an important thing to do. You are the subject matter expert on what it is you do and what you are, asking for. This was something that when I first started my advocacy journey, of course, everybody's different, but this is something that I felt kind of insecure about as a student. Because I was like, well, I'm just a student and I'm talking to all these high level people, and what do I have to offer? But as we all know, oftentimes people making these decisions have been out of school for quite a long time. They may or may not be as connected as they used to be. And at the end of the day, you are the person who is living and breathing this subject matter day in and day out at your day job. And that is valuable experience. And something that was a very powerful lesson for me to learn is that, like, when you are talking from your lived experience, you can never be wrong. You can never, have somebody test you on that if that's your reality in the world that you are living in. So oftentimes, high-level decision makers are responsible for a lot of things, and they might see the big picture and not always the day-to-day details. So things that might seem obvious to you might not always be obvious to them. So you may feel like you're explaining things that might seem obvious, but you might be surprised how much of that doesn't actually translate. And it's not because they don't care or they don't think about it. It's just that it's not something that they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis in the same way that you are. So what we want to do is, actually make those asks, bring those points of detail to light, which is going to catalyze a decision, and that's how things ultimately change. So there's going to be many types of asks that you make during your advocacy journey. You'll have big asks, small asks. You'll be asking different kinds of people. You'll be asking your allies to do things, influencers, decision makers. And your ask might be your whole advocacy goal, or it might just be a smaller strategic step towards your goal. So something that we recommend is developing what we call an elevator pitch. Well, I guess that's not just us, that's a more well-known thing, but um, developing this pitch in order to support your ask that includes, a relevant justification to the person that you're asking. So the reason this is called an elevator pitch is because, if you are doing sort of more formal lobbying and you're going between meetings and you catch yourself in an elevator for like 15 seconds with a really important person, having that really quick off the cuff pitch to give to them is going to be really important and a really good use of that time when they can't get away from you. So we'll talk a little bit about elevator pitches more in just a minute here. But first, I want to talk about scoping the ask. So we want to consider who we're asking and what we're asking them for, and focus on that overlap between reasonable and ambitious when we're looking at the SMART goals. So something that's within the realm of possibility, but still reaches a little bit higher. Um, Here's where we get into the fun tips. We like to recommend when you're asking for something quantitative. So for example, most often this is going to be money. It's always good to ask for more than what you need. It's the same as like a salary negotiation. Set the bar a little bit higher. Obviously you want to be realistic with this, but set the bar a little bit higher than what you need. And if they're going to negotiate you down, perhaps you're still able to still meet the original goal of what you were looking for. So we like to say ask for twice of what you need. You can obviously judge, based on the temperature of what's going on, whether or not that's reasonable for you, but just something to consider. And then we also recommend that you have sort of brainstormed backup asks that can help advance your goal that might be easier to say yes to. So the reality is you're going to go into talking to somebody about this. They're either going to tell you yes or no. If they tell you no, that's when you want to redirect and maybe find other ways to get to your desired stop. So having smaller things to ask for might be easier. And then this is sort of what I was talking about just a moment ago, but finding your voice as an advocate and thinking about at the very beginning of this presentation why we did the finding your why question. Super important to just stay grounded in where you're coming from on the issue and what motivates you to advocate. So having a very clear sense of why you're asking for these things, why you feel this is the right thing to do. It's just an important thing to think about and come prepared to speak to, because it's obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it can be a very compelling thing to listen to as somebody who's being advocated to. So like I mentioned before, your lived experience is just as important as technical experience. You can never be wrong when you're speaking from your own experience. And at the end of the day, something that is at least helpful to me is just thinking about the fact that we're all just people trying to do a job. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and think that, we're all trying to do a good job in what we think is right. So some people may just need a little bit of enlightening or extra context to see where you're coming from. Something else to consider is making it easy to say yes. So we want to make these people look amazing. We want to frame this as a championship opportunity. And we want to be okay with sharing the spotlight. I think this is something that as advocates, we have to kind of get used to is that most often we're going to be the people doing the groundwork, doing the implementation, but it may be the case that somebody else gets the spotlight because they gave the green stamp or gave the green light. And that's okay. It can be difficult. It's things that, we would definitely want to be working on self-care and we think about that. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our initiatives go through. And if that includes, making another person look amazing, that's just an easier way to get them to say yes. So, doing as much groundwork as possible so that the ask doesn't make more work for them, is also something to consider. Like, how can I drive this as far as I can? And then, bring it to the point where I need to bring somebody else in to do the green light. And then how can I help carry it from there? Um, okay, we're not going to have time to go into elevator pitches in super detail, but I really quickly just want to give you the formula that we use. Um, so we like to say, start off your elevator pitch with a hook, which is like something relevant to get their attention. So it could be like a news story that just came out, a point of flattery, whatever you need to do. You want to talk about your problem and your solution in a way that they care about or would see it, and then you want to go ahead and make your ask. So really quickly, just off the top of my head, you could say something like, let's say, for example, you're at a presentation where somebody from your admin is like presenting your campus strategic plan and they want to increase enrollment. So we're, going back to our example about the affordability and OER increasing retention. We can say, hey, Dean so and so, or hey, admin so and so, like really great presentation you just gave. I really appreciated what you said about this. Here's something that I've been thinking about. The way that the cost of textbooks is increasing and the cost of course materials is rising. We think that OER could be a way to solve this. I think that creating a grant or task force or what have you in order to address this could be really beneficial. Um, let's find some time to talk about it more. You're keeping it very high level, and of course, you might want to go into more specifics about what's happening on your campus specifically. But that's just a really quick example of, how you could put something like that together. Okay, we're gonna go into our last roadmap section. Um, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds just to jot down your quick thinking, and then maybe you can come back to this later and really build it out. Um, but choose something, I guess, first and foremost, that you want to ask your decision maker that you identified above in service of your goal. Think about how you could frame it to also be in service of their goals, and then really quickly how you might give an elevator pitch. Okay. And I'm really sorry, but I am going to speed you through that one because there's a few more things to get through. Okay. I'm going to leave you with just some quick tips, and then I'd like to try to leave, 10 minutes or so for questions, discussion. Um, so like I mentioned, when you make your ask, you're going to get one of two answers. You're going to get yes, you're going to get no, you might get a maybe. We'll talk about that. Um, Important to always try to play out the conversation in advance and have some backup asks that might be easier to accept. So, if this is a no, refocus the conversation by asking how you might work together instead. And so this is where this framework is going to sort of come into play because a reframing question you can say is like, okay, well, can you agree that X is a problem? And that's why you want to have your problem statement something that's, very agreeable, very universal, because you want them to say yes and then say, okay, well, here's what I believe. How can we work together in order to get to a solution on that that still sort of fulfills both of our goals? And those are the refocusing questions that are going to be helpful for you to ask in those conversations. Um, we do recommend as well, with no's, just be super careful about pushing back. Again, these are people that you are likely going to be meeting with time and time again and deteriorating the relationship, even though you may not agree, or like in some cases, you may think they're a jerk or like what have you. But in order to maintain that long-term relationship, that maintenance is important. So just be careful about pushing back too much. Obviously, if you have a relationship with this person, you know what's okay and what's not, and we all have a sense of that. But if things begin to feel tense, it's often better to just say, okay, thank you so much for your time. Let's follow up later, and take that time to sort of re-strategize. Like I mentioned about the focusing questions after getting a no. So we go back to our problem statement. Do you agree that this is a problem? If so, what are the circumstances under which you could see yourself supporting this? Is it possible to get you to a yes? What would you need to happen? Are there other proposals that you might support in order to address this problem? And then thinking about like, okay, if this is not a yes right now, here's some other ways that we could take a meaningful step in that direction. Is that something that you could support? Finding this is all about finding that common ground and that overlap. Um, and then something that I actually, before I get into the yeses, something else I want to mention too is uh this like going back and re-strategizing and saying, like okay, maybe we're not going to get to a solution today. I'll go take this back to my team and come up with something else, that sort of thing. All of that invites the opportunity for follow-up, which is a good thing. Like we don't want to think about leaving a meeting um with without getting what we want as a failure. It's an opportunity to go back, refocus, and then maintain that connection with that person. So if you can say things like, oh, I know this isn't going to work for you right now. Let me go back and re-strategize and I'll get something back to you. If you're creating those anchor points for another set of communication in the future, that's a good thing. Another point as well, and something that was extremely useful to me when I was learning how to do advocacy way back in the day is it's also important to remember that you're not going to have all the answers 100% of the time, especially in a meeting like this where you don't know what they're going to ask you. You might not have all of the relevant like data documents in front of you, and that's okay. Obviously, try to be prepared as much as you can. But if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, that's okay. It's totally okay to say, I don't know that right now, but I can find out for you. And that's a good thing because that's an opportunity to follow up, to share that information with them and to keep building that relationship. What you absolutely don't want to do is make something up or lie, and sort of degrade at your credibility that way. It's totally okay to not know. It's totally okay to not have all the answers. What people want to see from you is just sort of reliability and that willingness to follow up and take point on this. Um, okay, so now moving into a yes, which is obviously our ideal situation. We love if somebody says yes to us. So take a yes for what it is. Don't keep trying to convince them. Just say thank you and move straight into next steps. I know this might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how often I've seen this happen. So just say, okay, thank you. I'm really excited for that. What are the next things we need to do in order to make that happen? Um, if appropriate, always recommend sending a thank you note for those same reasons I just went off of earlier. A, because it's a polite thing to do, and then also because it's a great way to memorialize that yes in writing. So you can say, hey, Dean so and so, thank you so much for the chat today. Really happy that you agreed to XYZ. Here's what I can commit to doing in order to move this forward. Let's check in again at X date. Oftentimes, again, with these high level administrators, they've got a lot going on. It's very possible that this might fall off their radar. So you sort of need to be the person to do the follow up and stay on top of things. So don't assume that them saying a yes means it's done. It's your responsibility now to sort of do the follow-up, make sure that those next steps happen. And then super importantly, always follow through 110% on what you promise 100% of the time. Making sure that you are sort of reliable in this person's eyes is going to be key to advancing what it is that you want to advance. Okay, and then this is one of my last slides. I think it's one of the most important slides in here. And it's something that I would like to do a whole course on, if possible. It's something that, Joseph, you were talking about a little bit earlier. But it's very important to manage your own expectations, celebrate your wins, look after yourself, because this is a very hard thing to do. And it's a very long-term thing to do. So this is a long-term practice. It's not a one and done initiative. You're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to have a lot of redirection. And that's a hard thing to deal with. So, we're going to be constantly re-strategizing, refocusing based on these changes in our environment. So, like we were talking about before, absolutely celebrate the wins when you get them, not only for yourself, but to show others that these things are possible. Um, Having that space to celebrate that, to bring positivity, to bring hope, to say that, these little incremental steps forward are possible and we can do them, is very, very important, no matter how big or small. And this is especially important when success depends on other people getting the credit for your work. So, whether it's just like a moment with your team or with your committee that you're working on this with, or even just with yourself, like just take a moment to sit with it and say, that was a small step, but I did it. And we can do another small step. And slowly but surely, we're going to get there and chip away at this big issue. So, just wanted to end on that, and really underscore how important that is, taking care of yourself. This is a difficult thing to do, and I think, like a noble thing to do. Not everybody does this. Not everybody gets to do work that they're super passionate about. So, just take it slow. We're all in this together. Alrighty. So I have about 10 minutes left, or maybe just under. I really quickly just wanted to share a few resources with you. So these are a few things that we offer through SPARC. If you just want some like inspiration of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. Like, what are some things that I can propose? This is our state policy playbook. And I will pop that in the chat as well. It'll also be directly linked from the slides. So what this is these are just some policy recommendations. It is a little bit more targeted to the state level legislation, but there are things that you can implement on your campus as well, or at least get inspiration for. So please do take a read through that and use that as you will. And then if you're interested, I do also like to share our state policy tracker. So this gives you a little bit of a better sense if you're not somebody who's super um, dialed in already. We try to do our best to keep track of any legislation that's going through different states, and reflect it on this tracker. So we keep it up to date as best as we can. Of course, if you know of other things that are happening that are not reflected on here, please email us. We'd be happy to update it. But yeah, hopefully those two things can help you a little bit in your brainstorming. All right. And then just thank you. I know that was a lot of information first thing in the morning. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to use anything from the slides. Keep those roadmaps, use them whenever you want. And I've shared my email below if you have any questions or anything I can clarify, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. So, and just thank you again to the team for having me today.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much for this session. We invite questions. This session ends officially at 10:15 to give everyone a bit of a break from their computers before our next session begins. But please feel free to stick around for a little bit because we do want to be able to have everyone share their thoughts and ask their questions. Please also consider bringing all of this learning to your campus and maybe go through the foundation framework together with a team at your own campus.
Thanks all. So yeah, if there's any questions, please feel free to either hop off mute or pop something in the chat.
I know that I'm like taking all this in for how I'm gonna think to apply the next steps. Um, One question I have for you is in your past experiences, have there been particular influencers out of that list you had that you
Mm,
found were surprisingly helpful allies that maybe at first glance you didn't realize?
that's a great question. Um, I mean, for me, the most obvious one is students, and I know that that's, what comes to mind. Um, First and foremost for all of us, but I think, really quickly, one, just like the amount that students can be influencers that they is really untapped. I think another one is just influencers who may influence in a small way, but who come together. So I think that in my experience, the greatest success I've seen is when there's examples of like coordinated messaging from these influencers. So like there's an institution here in Alberta that has done one of the coolest things I've ever seen, which is that their student government encouraged uh, basically put out some communication encouraging students to talk about course material affordability in their course evaluations, which was super cool. And then that created like a lot more feedback on that than ever would be done individually. And that had a really, profound impact on just sort of the environment of, there was a lot of students who or faculty who reached out to them and said, "Oh my gosh, like I didn't even know this was a thing. Am I supposed to be using this?" Um, so thinking about ways to put those voices together. Um, I also think like like parents and campus community, these are all people like ultimately the institution wants to serve and is there like I hate to use the word customer, but like really that is kind of what it is. That has been like a surprising group as well. But I think yeah, my biggest takeaway, which isn't really an answer to your question, but it's those small micro influencers coming together and using their voice in a coordinated way. All right. I see a I see a question just about the Michigan bill. I'm not personally familiar. Um, but yeah, definitely encourage some discussion on that if anyone has any information. Great. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm going to take that as a compliment. Hopefully I was thorough. Um, so yeah, I hope you all enjoy the rest of the sessions today and just thank you again for being with me and going through all of that.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everyone.
again.
Thanks, Hailey.